Hello, Wonderhussy here, out in a part of the Mojave Desert that is rapidly becoming developed. You can see right here behind where I'm standing, there's a proposed yellow pine solar farm going in. Although I'm not sure this sign is still relevant because the expiration date of March 2022 has already come and gone a year ago. But whether this project got canceled or that was just a typo, either way, there's no disputing the fact that there are a ton of solar projects going into this part of the Mojave Desert, which is an area right on the California-Nevada state line, about 45 miles outside of Las Vegas. Or maybe even less. That's right, Las Vegas and all of its attendant craziness is just over those mountains back there, about a 45-minute drive. And the small, semi-rural community of Pahrump is only about half hour that way. So this is kind of a weird no man's land out in the middle of nowhere, coincidentally, right on the way to my house, that no one has seemed to want to do anything with until fairly recently. It's an area called Charleston View, and I've made videos about this strange and mysterious no man's land before. Noteworthy because the old Spanish trail runs right through the middle of it. That's right, the trail that was used by the Spaniards starting in, I think, the 1840s, that went all the way from Santa Fe to Los Angeles, runs right through here to this day. But even though the old Spanish trail itself has been paved, there really hasn't been any other development at all, at least not of any significance, in the last 250 plus years. That is, until they started putting these solar farms in here fairly recently, just within the last few years, and there was a huge amount of pushback against these solar farms. Now you might go, why would people push back against solar farms in the middle of nowhere? I mean, we got to put these things in somewhere. It's clean energy from the rays of the sun. Who could find fault with that? Well, apparently plenty of folks can find fault with it, and understandably so. And it wasn't just lefties that were protesting these solar plants. It was also, horseback riders, ATV riders from Pahrump, God-fearing all-American rednecks. This was one of the rare situations when everyone was united in their opposition to a project. Sadly, in these polarized times, it's pretty rare when people from the left and people from the right see eye to eye on anything. And apparently, it takes something like a solar farm to make that happen. Okay, I guess the reason they were opposed to this solar farm going in here is it's pristine desert. It's really hard packed. If you bust up the crust on this desert soil, you create massive amounts of dust because it gets real windy out here. And next thing you know, there's going to be dust blowing all over the place. Well, you still might say, well, yeah, but we got to build these solar farms somewhere. Well, that's the other part of these people's arguments. On both sides, the argument is you should just put the solar panels in the city. It's completely asinine to build these giant acres and acres and acres of solar panels out here, because then you got to build transmission lines and you got to build battery banks, places to store the solar power that's generated that goes through the transmission lines. Why not just put this stuff in the city? Why doesn't every house and every commercial building in America have solar panels on the roof? That's why folks were up in arms about this solar farm. In addition to all the endangered plants and animals like the desert tortoise, whose habitat is disrupted by putting these fences up, which stops them from getting from one side to the other. I was wondering if this weird hole in the fence had something to do with that. I don't think it does, though. I mean, if you go to the Ivanpah solar plant, which I made a video there once, it's the one with the big glowing towers and mirrors all around them. Well, they did build these little bridges for the desert tortoise to walk under the road. Like there's roads around it, and they don't want the tortoise getting squashed by cars, so they built them these little tortoise underpasses. Anyway, I thought that's what this hole in the fence might be, but I guess not, because there's no ramp or anything for the tortoise to get up or down from this platform. So I have no idea what this is for, other than a little peek into the sweet, sweet, juicy land where this proposed solar farm is supposedly going to be one of these days. Assuming that expiration date on the sign is a typo. Anyway, like I said, folks were up in arms when that solar plant over there went up, and folks are up in arms about this solar plant that's supposedly going up. So it really surprised me when just about a week ago, I heard about another proposed project out here that's supposedly going up that no one is up in arms about. Okay, just a few miles west of this solar farm and this proposed solar farm, they're supposedly building a spaceport. That's right, a spaceport. I guess it's kind of like an airport, only for craft that is going up into outer space. Okay, I made a video one time at the Mojave Spaceport, which is a few hundred miles from here in the Mojave Desert down in Southern California, closer to, oh God, it's really not close to anything. But anyway, the Mojave Spaceport is pretty well known. I guess now Vegas wants in on the action. And so this right here behind me is the proposed site of the Las Vegas Spaceport. I'm not making this up. Oh my gosh. I kind of wish I was, but I kind of wish I wasn't, or I'm kind of glad I'm not, because, I don't know, a spaceport in the desert just 30 miles from where I live in the middle of nowhere? That sounds kind of cool. You know, like I was saying earlier, there hasn't been much development of any kind in this part of the desert for over 250 years, other than the very quirky and interesting stuff going on over in Charleston View. They've got pot farms, they've got an eco farm, they've got a Russian bathhouse, they've got a shooting range. There's all kinds of crazy stuff going on in Charleston View. But a spaceport would really take this area to another level. I mean, we are only about 45 minutes from Vegas, or I mean, from the Vegas Strip. Actually, from the edge of Vegas, we're probably only like, I don't know, 25 minutes. It's not that far. It's just right over the mountains there. So imagine, you're some tourist in Las Vegas. You've always had an interest in space, all things space, aerospace, and you want to come out here and watch some rockets launch or satellites go up, or, well, I guess they're going to have supposedly a hotel and a casino and a restaurant and a whole big thing going on out here for all those, well, I say this in a nice way, but nerds and geeks who are into space. And I count myself among those nerds and geeks. I'm interested in space. I'd be down to go stay at a hotel casino at a spaceport. I mean, I was excited enough when I went to lunch at the Mojave Spaceport that time. Can you imagine how much grander the Las Vegas Spaceport's gonna be? I mean, they're even talking about having air races out here, okay? The famous Reno air races that happen every year in September. I think this past few weeks ago was the last Reno air races ever. And so the developers of this Las Vegas Spaceport right here in the desert, just outside Charleston View, 30 minutes from my Death Valley compound, they're supposedly going to have air races of their own next October. Okay, looking out at this vast swath of undeveloped nothingness right now, you might find it hard to believe that a year from now, there's supposedly going to be air races held here with 500 vendors and thousands of attendees. But according to their website, which is lasvegasspaceport.org, I guess the .com was already taken. According to them, that's exactly what's going to happen. And so, again, I'm puzzled as to why I only heard about this about a week ago. A viewer of this channel actually emailed me going, "Hey, did you hear about this spaceport going in near your house?" Well, no, bizarrely, I hadn't. And when they were putting up the solar farm, I got like thousands of emails from all these environmentalists wringing their hands and freaking out about the tortoise and the yucca and this, that, and the other. Well, where are they all now? I mean, if this solar farm displaced a bunch of tortoise and yucca, imagine what an entire spaceport with a hotel casino is gonna do. Not to mention, what's it gonna do to the airspace above where we live? You know, where I live is, you know, a lot of people moved out there because it's very, very peaceful. It's very, very quiet. There's no traffic. You never even hear a car alarm. You know, like when you live in the city, you're constantly hearing that woo, 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 woo. You never hear that out there. You hardly ever hear sirens because there's hardly any crime. I mean, there really is virtually no crime. So imagine all these people living out here in this super quiet desert valley, all of a sudden having a spaceport dumped in their backyard. There's going to be all kinds of air traffic zooming around in the sky, rockets launching and satellites flying and astronauts astronauting and tourists touring. I mean, again, I do like the peace and quiet of the desert, but to me, it sounds kind of awesome. But there is one downside to this proposed spaceport. And before I go any farther, I should just say, this is all just a proposal. I mean, you go to their website, they have all these grandiose plans and renderings, but it looks like they're still trying to hustle for investors. I can't imagine they would have that hard of a time finding investors, though. I mean, this is right outside Vegas. There's 39 million tourists a year. Like, talk about a great place to build a spaceport. I feel like they probably will find their investors, and they probably will end up building this spaceport, no matter how many environmentalists come out here and chain themselves to the yucca plants. It's pretty much a foregone conclusion that this spaceport or some other spaceport is probably going to go up. But the thing that bums me out is where it's going up and what it's going to displace. Okay, when I first heard about this proposed Las Vegas spaceport, my first thought was, no way would I not have heard about this. I mean, they announced it back in June, and I didn't hear about it until mid-September. So I don't know how this slipped past my radar, but it did. And so I Googled it, and it said it was going to be out here in the desert at a place called Hidden Hills Ranch. And again, I was surprised because I'd never heard of Hidden Hills Ranch, or at least I didn't know it was called by that name. This is Hidden Hills Ranch Road that I'm parked on now. Comes right off of the old Spanish Trail Highway here. And I didn't know this was called Hidden Hills Ranch Road. I mean, that's what it says it is on Google Maps. I knew it as Cathedral Canyon Road because it leads to a place called Cathedral Canyon. And Cathedral Canyon has been one of my favorite places, gosh, for at least 15 years. I made a video about it a long time ago when I first started my channel. The production values aren't very good on it because it was real windy the day I came here. And so I always intended to come back and do a better job. And well, I guess that's why I'm here today. Because believe it or not, that Las Vegas spaceport is going to be right here at the site of Cathedral Canyon. Or Hidden Hills Ranch, whatever you want to call it. Anyway, I guarantee most people watching this video never watched my crappy Cathedral Canyon video that I made way back in 2016 or 2017, whenever it was. So let's get in the car and drive down to Cathedral Canyon, and I'll show you exactly why it's been one of my favorite places all these years. Okay, we're here at the site of the once magnificent Cathedral Canyon. And I say once magnificent because sadly, what's left here today is just a remnant of what was apparently super amazing. Okay, I didn't come out here for the first time until, gosh, I think 2008, 2009. So I never really got to see this place in its heyday. But if you grew up in Las Vegas in the 70s, 80s, even 90s, you remember how amazing this place was. Okay, so essentially it's just a box canyon. Well, maybe more of a gully. Maybe it should be called Cathedral Gully. But this guy who made this carved all these little nooks and alcoves into the walls, and he had religious statues in all of them. And he had a huge statue of Christ of the Andes standing right here. Unfortunately, the shooters got to him. Now you tell me, who shoots up a statue of Jesus? Anyway, his head and his arms might be missing, but you can see there's still a cross laying down there by his feet, and it still says Christ of the Andes just below. And down here inside the canyon, you can still today see these little nooks that this guy carved. And I guess at one time there were little religious statues inside each one of these. You know, because the walls of this canyon are made out of some real soft, crumbly, like gypsum type stuff. And it's very haunting walking through the ruins of this old religious shrine and seeing these old alcoves that I guess the statues were stolen out of long ago, probably by the same idiots who shot up that Christ of the Andes statue. But you can still kind of get a feeling for what this place must have been like back in its heyday. Now, apologies for the graffiti down here, but apparently there used to be a waterfall coming down the far edge of the canyon, and I don't know if you can make that out, but there's a really cool drawing of the Sermon of the Mount. And then I guess the water from the waterfall collected at the bottom in this huge pool. So there was like a big, like a baptismal pool or a baptismal fount. Isn't that what they call it when there's a pool of water that you get baptized in? I mean, I'm guessing if there's a, well, the Sermon of the Mount, I guess that didn't have anything to do with baptizing. What do I know? I am not a Christian. I've said that before, but I admire many things about Christianity. And I think this little religious canyon was, or must have been, super amazing because it wasn't just Christian stuff. I mean, yeah, we've seen a statue of Christ and, you know, the Sermon on the Mount, but there were also, my understanding is there was also a lot of like philosophical quotes and quotes from other religions, and it was just meant to be a spiritual place. Only now it seems to have gone the way of all spiritual places and crumbled into disrepair. Look at this. Can still go up the old staircase. Anyway, the coolest thing about Cathedral Canyon back in the day, in its heyday, was when you got here and stood up top, there was actually a suspension bridge going all the way across it. In fact, you can still see part of the foundation where this bridge was attached on this side, and then it went clear over to the other side. You can see there's a foundation there too. Well, apparently this bridge was covered in astroturf and had electric lights on it. In fact, this whole canyon was wired for electricity somehow. I guess if you got here at night, somebody was telling me, I think, that they took a girlfriend out here or something one night and she didn't know anything about it. They drove out here to the middle of nowhere in the desert, which back then, you know, in the 70s, 80s, 90s, this really was the middle of nowhere. Pahrump was hardly anything. Vegas was nowhere as near as big as it is now. So coming out here, you were really going out into the boonies. Anyway, he took this girl out here. She probably thought he was going to kill her. But when they got out here, he brought her down into the canyon and he flipped this light switch and the whole canyon lit up. Okay, imagine there's a suspension bridge going across the top. Well, all of a sudden lights come on that, like the Golden Gate Bridge, and all these little nooks and alcoves tucked away in the canyon walls, all of them lit up and all the statues were glowing, and gosh, I think there might have even been some kind of music playing. It must have been out of this world. And I guess they even had like religious ceremonies here, like church meetings here, up until at least the 70s. Okay, the story behind this place, there was this guy named Roland Wiley. He was an attorney out of Las Vegas. He was originally from Iowa, but he came west as a young man in the 1920s, and, well, like many people from the East, he fell in love with the wide open blue skies and vast expanses of nothingness out here in the Mojave Desert. And so he set up shop in Vegas, became a very successful attorney. In fact, he was even the DA of Clark County for 4 years. But on his downtime, he would come out here to the desert, and he found this parcel of property, this parcel of land called Hidden Hills Ranch. Now, I don't know if it was already called that or if he named it that. That might be the name he gave it, but he originally bought all this property and built this religious shrine. And he built it for everyone to share. Everyone was welcome. Anybody who wanted to could drive out here with a girl they were trying to impress and flip on the lights in the middle of the night, which I think is pretty cool. And I do think it's a real shame that it's fallen into such disrepair. I guess Roland Wiley passed away in 1994, and I think his kids, from something I read online, his kids just weren't interested or didn't have the money to keep it up anymore. And so I thought they gave the land to the BLM, the Bureau of Land Management, the federal government. I thought they gave the land to the federal government. And so that this is now public lands, and you're allowed to camp and party and apparently shoot stuff up. I mean, sadly, aside from Christ of the Andes, you can also see some Yahoo took an old TV out here and blew it to smithereens. You can see there's side-by-side tracks running all through the canyon. You can even see where folks have had campfires down here. Matter of fact, there was even a rave out here about 6 months ago. I'm really bummed. I missed it. I didn't think it was going to be that cool, and come to find out it was amazing. One of my friends went and she said this whole canyon, this collective from Southern California, took over. They just threw this underground rave and they set lights up, and just like it must have been back in the day, lights in all the little nooks, and they had a DJ and they had speakers and they had a sound system. And well, that was 6 months ago, and I haven't been out here since then. And frankly, I was kind of worried that when I came out here, there would be a bunch of trash left behind by these ravers, but I don't see anything indicative of a rave having transpired here. I mean, ravers aren't the type to shoot up televisions. You know, all ravers want to do is take drugs and dance and feel each other up because they're all on ecstasy. You know, I don't even see nary a glow stick out here. So I'm gonna go ahead and say those ravers did an excellent job cleaning up, and I hope they come back sometime, and I hope they come back sometime soon, because like I was saying, this whole parcel of land just got bought up by these yahoos that want to build a spaceport. That's right, the Las Vegas spaceport is gonna be right here at the site of Cathedral Canyon. Now, I don't want to get my panties in a bunch over nothing. Hidden Hills Ranch is a huge chunk of desert out here, and I think it stretches on way back there. Matter of fact, I used to come out here and do photo shoots when I worked as a nude model. I got some pretty cool photos taken down here too. Anyway, one time we went way out there, just followed the dirt road, and there was all kinds of busted old buildings out there. I guess that was all part of this Hidden Hills Ranch. I think Roland Wiley had some kind of ranch house out here that he would, you know, use as his getaway place on the weekends. And he even had an airstrip out here. There was an airstrip just over there on the other side of the canyon, because back in the 30s, I don't know when he started building this thing, 40s, 50s, the road from Vegas to Pahrump wasn't even paved until 1968. So it was a really long and arduous journey to get from Vegas out here in those days. I mean, now, yeah, you can get out here, and depending on what part of town you're coming from, 30, 45 minutes from Vegas. Back then, it was like an all-day affair. So he would fly in on this airstrip he built, which I guess is somewhere on the other side of the canyon there. And then all those busted up old buildings that I saw at that one photo shoot, I don't know, maybe that was part of its ranch or something. And look down here. You can even see the remains of the old iron gates leading into Cathedral Canyon. I mean, there's not much left now, but it sure is a metaphor. This whole place is just so indicative of how Nevada doesn't give a hoot, to use a polite expression, about any of its cultural resources. Oh yeah, if you're checking out that door there, that's a bathroom. There was even bathrooms, plumbed toilets down here. So if you came down here and had to take a tinkle, well, you didn't have to pop a squat behind a bush. You could go in a real flush toilet like civilized folk. I'm telling you, this was fancy. But yeah, since '94, since the BLM, federal government, took over, or whoever is managing this place now, no one seems to care. And so now these developers are going to come in and build this spaceport with a hotel and a casino and a gift shop and the whole dang 9 yards. And they're probably going to pave right over this place, and no one is ever going to remember Roland Wiley or what he stood for. And I, for one, think it's a gosh darn shame. This should be, well, it should be on the National Register of Historic Places, or at the very least, it should be on the Nevada Register of Historic Places. I mean, how many historic places are there in Nevada? Guys, come on. Somebody needs to come out here and tell these space people to leave Cathedral Canyon alone. Now again, I don't want to get my panties in a twist. Like I said, this Hidden Hills Ranch is a vast tract of property. But from all the research I was able to do, it looked to me like they bought a 240 acre parcel, and I'm pretty sure it's right here where the old suspension bridge with its cables attached to those two eye-rings used to span this magical, mystical canyon with all its twinkling lights and religious quotes. And I guess there was little benches you could sit on, little paths you could walk. I mean, you can see how relatively green it is down in the canyon. There's mesquite trees. It's at least a couple degrees cooler. It's a really nice hidden oasis in the desert. So hopefully these astronauts and developers take that into consideration when they're building this spaceport, if not only for Roland Wiley, but also for this. Okay, I haven't even gotten to the best part of this story yet. This is a grave belonging to one of the most fascinating characters in the entire Southwest, in my opinion. And I've been meaning to make a video about this guy, but it's logistically very complicated. Okay, it's really hard to read because of the way the sun and the shadows are right now, but it says Queho, or Kehoe, I'm not sure how you pronounce it, Quehoe, 1889 to 1919, Nevada's last renegade Indian. He survived alone. He survived alone. How about that? Those 3 words alone made me interested when I first saw this monument. I didn't know it was a grave. I went home and I looked him up, and oh my gosh, he was a half-breed Native American from the area. He was half white, half, I guess, Paiute Shoshone. And so he was cast out of both cultures because, you know, half-breed. That's all he ever heard. And then on top of it all, he had a club foot, so that made him even more of an outcast. And so between having a club foot and being a half-breed, he got pretty, let's just say, disillusioned with society, and he turned out to be a pretty bad hombre. He was a notorious horse thief. I think he raped and murdered and terrorized the white settlers in this area. I think they ended up finding his remains finally in a cave in Black Canyon on the Colorado River, you know, down below the Hoover Dam where all those hot springs are. Well, I guess when they were blasting the Hoover Dam, they found Quehoe's bones, or Kehoe, apologies, I don't know how to pronounce it. They found his bones, and they knew they were his because, I don't know, he somehow like figured out he was bitten by a rattlesnake because he had like a bandana tied around his leg, and I think they found some items with him that had been known to have been stolen by him. And so they collected the bones of this once fearsome, I mean, he really was fearsome. He terrorized this whole area. I guess in the late 1800s, mothers would warn their kids to behave. If you don't do what I say, I'm going to tell Quehoe to come get you. You know, it was that kind of a deal. Anyway, they got his bones. And then sadly, I think they used to parade them in Vegas. Every year there's a thing in Vegas called the Hell Dorado Days Parade in May. Back in the day, it was a big deal. They had this huge parade down on Fremont Street, and everybody in town had a float, you know, Liberace, Frank Sinatra, everybody got in on it. They all wore Western outfits. Like, it was a big deal. Well, I guess the Elks Club or somebody had Quehoe's bones in a bag or something. I mean, maybe they put him together like a full skeleton at first and sat him in the back of the car and drove up and down the street. Well, as the years went by, the bones really fell into disrepair, and finally they were just like, it was an old bag of bones, and somebody, and I don't know who, took pity on the memory of Quehoe. Even though he was a bad hombre, they still wanted to give him some sort of dignified resting place, and so they brought his bones out here. And to my understanding, they are interred in this cement block, and it looks like, well, you know, they put this little epitaph for him, and then somebody put up a little solar light for him. Look at that. And someone even put a little flower for him. So apparently there are still people who remember Quehoe and care enough about his memory to leave him lights. I don't know. It was a complicated history. I'm not saying I defend what he did, but I certainly do sympathize with him. And it sounds to me like he was just kind of like a man of his times. You know, people were just violent back then. But then again, yeah, he did some unspeakable things. Either way, I still don't think his bones and his little marker deserve to be paved over for some dingling douchebag spaceport. And again, I guess I shouldn't say dingling or douchebag because I actually think the spaceport is probably going to be awesome, and I'll be one of the first visitors. If the developers of the Las Vegas spaceport are watching this video, call me. I'd love to be involved in your building process. I can document it. I'll be one of your biggest boosters, huh? Get it? All I'm saying is, I hope they don't forget about the memory of Quehoe's bones and the legacy of Roland Wiley. I mean, surely there's a way where the spaceport and the hotel and the gift shop and all that can be, you know, over yonder somewhere. And this little patch of desert, this little lonely, busted patch of desert, can be left exactly the way it is. Crumbling and evocative of a kinder, gentler time. You know, the good old days when half-breed Indians broke into your house and raped your wife and stole all your guns. Well, you know what I mean. A kinder, gentler time, like the 1930s, 1940s, when Vegas was a small town and Roland Wiley had to fly his little airplane out here, and then he built this religious shrine and folks would all come gather down here on a Sunday morning back in the 1960s. Those were kinder times. Those were gentler times. And I, for one, would hate to see those times and this place forgotten. Come on, Governor Lombardo. I just read where Nevada's rainy day slush fund is at an all-time high, probably because of all the money y'all make off Burning Man. Well, can't you take just a little tiny bit of that slush fund and set it aside to preserve Cathedral Canyon? I know together we can save this place from the Spaceport.